Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a very special Cocktails and Conversation with Upstate Women in Film and Television with Megan Harding. Very exciting. So first, before we start, I just wanted to say hello to everybody. Welcome again. It's really a pleasure to see how many from our Upstate Film family are coming to this event. So it's nice to see everybody and see very familiar names. If you don't know me, I'm Sunny Edelman. I'm the president of Upstate Women in Film and Television. And if you don't know about Uplift, we are an organization that we are educating and mentoring and providing programs like this for women filmmakers to help support them. If you're interested in joining Uplift and helping us to provide programs like this in the future, I'm just going to put into the chat our web address, and you can see information about joining us there. And so I'd like to introduce to you Jillian Fisher, who's going to be moderating our event. Jillian Fisher has been a part of Uplift for many years, serving on the board as our programmer and marketer, really everything, kind of a woman that does everything. And she also, you may know her, you probably have worked with her on a film if you guys have been working in upstate New York, because she also deals with locations, with Jillian Fisher Locations. So here is Jillian. I'm going to let her take it away. Welcome again, everyone, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks, Sunny. I am very pleased to welcome Megan Harding as the wonderful person with whom I have been looking forward to having this conversation for such a long time. Megan, welcome.
Thank you. You're really too kind. I'm really, really super happy to be here.
Well, so our relationship goes back to What Breaks the Ice. I looked over at my note. And I was scouting your house. I was with the producer of the movie who knows your husband and you, and we were scouting the house, and the producer was speaking with your husband. And so you and I started chatting. And I will never forget, I'm just going to touch on this a little. I will never forget that I was just asking, what you did, and you said what you did. And so you said that you had worked on the Frozen documentary back then, and we're going back a couple of years ago. And I said to you, oh, I watched that. And you're like, oh, okay. And I said to you, and we'll touch on this further down the line in the conversation, but I said to you that one of the things that moved me the most about that documentary was the fact that in the beginning, in the conceptual stage, that Elsa was more of a villain until all of a sudden the realization that she didn't ask for this. She was born with this. Just dawned on them. Actually, I have goosebumps saying that. And that changed the whole trajectory of the film. And then you said to me, oh, you really did see this. So I remember that clearly. So we will talk about that later on down the line. So starting off, so Australia has given us some really wonderful gifts. You, your husband, and a little show that I became a fan of many, many, many moons ago called Kath and Kim.
Oh my God.
Did you ever watch that?
Yes, of course.
Oh my God. So in my head, it still rattles, Kim I, look am I, look am I, look am I.
Look am I, yep.
So tell me, how did you get, because your genre is documentaries, really? How did you get started? Because, we're going to cover the span of your career, but that's such a particular thing. To choose to tell other people's stories is such a particular way to go in the industry. So growing up, walk me through this.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing because in Australia, you're not so specialized. You tend to do a lot more things. And indeed, when I started out I went to film school first, and I was going to be an editor. That's what I wanted to be. And I went to film school for editing. I went to the National Film School in Australia, which is really a wonderful place. But then I graduated and I realized that, because the industry is so small there, you have to wait for another editor to die before you can take their place. So I was like, well, I'm going to have to, do something else. I'm going to have to produce. I'm going to have to, do more of that. And actually what I ended up really doing was comedy. I primarily did comedy programming in Australia. And I worked for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and I worked in a department that did comedy programming, but then also arts documentaries. And they were kind of lumped together in this sort of unusual pairing, I guess. But it was kind of perfect for me because they were kind of the things that I loved. I loved art and I loved making comedy shows. So, I got the opportunity to really do both and do them a lot, which was great. And then when I moved to the States, I was in New York, obviously, and it was 2009, and it was the height of, the recession, and there were no jobs. And I came from Australia, which didn't go through the same experience, basically. So I just came here thinking, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to just start working, it'll all be totally fine.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't. And what I found out was that in New York, it was primarily the sort of non-scripted work that I could find work to do. And as I sort of got into it, then I realized that that was really what I loved doing. And primarily what I really loved doing as well was telling stories about, and I haven't always done this here, but my favorite things that I work on are about, creativity and how that works and how people bring themselves into their work, and the process of creating things, which is, why the Frozen thing I liked. And I kept returning to that because it was such a great way to sort of look at how that works, how it's actually not really easy. We have this notion that is something that you can sit down and all of a sudden all these ideas come out and you just write your masterpiece, you paint and it's not that at all. It's this incredible process. And so I'm always fascinated by that. And I'm also fascinated by the fact that people are all so different in the way that they approach things. And
absolutely.
So, and also in something like that, it's always about bringing yourself into that as well. Like there's always a part of yourself which is represented in the work that you create. So I'm kind of interested in that kind of intersection as well. And as well as telling stories, there's that part, but there's also telling stories about people that do unlikely things, I think, that are sort of surprising as well.
So you touched on an awful lot there.
Sorry, I just
no, that's wonderful, because you've really given me an overview of yourself and your process. And it also, makes me want to jump back. So you started off in editing. Now, I'm curious because to me, I'm not somebody who watches a lot of reality television, but I will never forget, I was flipping through the channels and there was this show on, I think it was called The Newlyweds or something, with Jessica Simpson and Nick Lachey. And Jessica Simpson was shopping with her mother. And literally it was all cut together that for whether it was 30 seconds or a minute, it seemed like forever. And all they were saying was cute, 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 cute. And all of a sudden this light bulb went off in my head. Oh my God, whoever is editing this is brilliant. because it was the first time that I really got editing. And editing for reality TV, I can't even imagine, because you're taking how many hours of footage and you're breaking it into, talk about a bite-sized nugget.
Yep.
So for you to even start off as an editor, what was it that drew you in to becoming an editor in the first place? Because that is really specific.
I think it was, I mean, I feel like when I was younger, I was quite shy. I'm not really that shy anymore. I seem to have grown out of it over the years. But I was very sort of like, I was introverted, and that seemed to be like a good place to start, because you didn't have to sort of, deal with too many people, but you were also intimately involved with the sort of storytelling process and creating those stories. And back in those days, when I was sort of more interested in editing, I was more interested in scripted dramas, and so I think it was really that. But I also, I mean, because Australia is such a different situation, where like it is really so very, very small. I realized, apart from realizing that the editing community was already filled up, so that, to actually get a break, you did have to wait for someone to leave for an opening to happen. I also realized that it was very difficult in Australia to make a living, and I had to be more nimble and do different things. And so it was at that point that I realized that maybe film wasn't the way to go for me, because they only made 5 films a year. And even if you were the lucky one to be on all of those films, the budgets were quite low. It just wasn't going to be sustainable. So it seemed to me at the time that, television offered a lot more opportunities, both from, a work point of view, like I could get work, but also that I thought I could get more interesting work, because there's more of it. So you could try new things, and certainly we did try and do that with like some of the comedy programs we did. At the time, it was like there was more of a freedom, because in some ways there was less at stake, because if there's only 5 films coming out of Australia in a year, and I don't know what the actual number is, but it's a handful, then the stakes are pretty high, that it has to be everything, it has to really make it. Whereas I feel like in the world of television, there's a little bit more freedom to innovate. And so that's kind of what drew me there. And once I was there, it was like, oh, and then you can tell these stories, you can tell those stories. And it was like, there seemed to be a lot of things happening.
So that's fascinating to me, simply because obviously there are so many well-known actors that have come from Australia. So then for actors, it's still, you really want to make it in America, is what I'm understanding, because even in Australia, although, we look at the pool of actors and talent that comes from Australia, but their eyes on the prize are still to make it here because of the smaller pool in Australia.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I mean, unless perhaps you're an actor that gets, on one of the sort of regular long-running shows or something like that, I guess there's those kind of opportunities. There's theatre outside of feature film, so there are things that they can do, but I do think, again, America it just offers so much, if that's your industry that you're interested in pursuing. So I think ultimately most Australian actors give it a shot at some point.
Interesting. So now I'm curious, because obviously there's so much talk about what it takes for women to get into the industry in America, and we'll touch on that. But how did you find being a woman and trying to get in? I mean, because obviously, becoming an editor and having the understanding that it does it matter if someone dies and you're a man or a woman waiting for the job, will the man get the job over the woman? So that's the first part of my question. And then the second part is, when you decided to become a producer, were you welcomed? How were you able to actually, break into the field?
It's an interesting question. And, I felt like, the first part of your question, I never really felt like there was, there probably was a boys' club that I didn't realize, and maybe I just didn't realize it seemed to be sort of an equal playing field to me. But in the second part, at first, nobody was particularly interested. I do have to say. And there was a moment there that I was like, oh, well, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I need to find something else to do. And I'd actually gone back to college to be an archaeologist. I don't know.
Wow. I love that.
And then what happened was, like, I hadn't really gone into it in too much detail. And I started, because it's a different sort of system when you start, like I had started my own production company and I was trying to make things, because there's a lot of funding that happens through the government in Australia.
Okay.
And I started getting all this money to make things. So then I was like, I guess I've got to do this now, because they've given me all this money to make this stuff and I have to deliver this. And so I kept on doing that for a while. And then eventually I'd built up a little bit of a body of work, and I'd had a couple of sort of successful little short films and little things along the way. And that meant that I ended up, and also I did a TV show, a comedy TV show, very low budget, very sort of cult niche, but it was successful enough that it got me a job at the ABC in Australia. So, and then I had more opportunities, because I was the one that could make shows or decide what shows got made, or help people to make shows that I thought, or marry other people together, like talent together, and with producers and things like that. But it was, yeah, I found it interesting, because initially there was no one that really wanted to take me on as even a production assistant. I found that really difficult when shifting over from editing to that. So,
well, I'm glad that you're saying that, because I think so often, I think people do question the path that they're on. And I think that it's important that people understand that, what they see, the outcome of the body of your work at this point is not necessarily indicative of the path that you have been on. And that more often than not, paths go like this. They don't tend to do this. So I'm glad that that you're mentioning this, that you even questioned, that you thought, hey, woolly mammoths are cool. These are important things to know. So may I ask what made you, because now it sounds like, you became rather successful in Australia. So may I ask what made you then decide to come to the States?
Yeah. So, I guess, I was certainly, I loved what I was doing in Australia, and it was really my passion. But then a husband, well, we had met at film. That was the other thing. Ben and I had gone to film school together, but he had moved over to the States. And then we reconnected, I think, once at Sundance one year. And then, it wasn't until like 2008, he came out to Australia to work on a movie. And then we reconnected, and I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. I guess I've got to go to the States. And it had never really occurred to me to do that before.
Right.
And I did it without, I think, as you say, like, there's always these career paths that go like this, but it's also life choices as well. I don't think I thought about it very much. And had I actually thought about it, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I was
Mhm.
also like, well, if I don't do it, I'll never know. And it could be terrible. And truthfully, for the first 18 months, it was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But again, it's what you do in life, right? You've got to take risks sometimes, and you don't really know where they're going to go.
Absolutely. We have to take the risks, and you have to also be willing to persist. I mean, I know that that is kind of overused, still she persisted today, but it's apropos along so many, things. So you come over here, it's 2009, and I can attest, I was chaperoning, I myself was the head of PR for a city. And my position was the first position that was let go.
Right.
So believe me, I get it. And I was chaperoning a school trip for one of my daughters at the FDR estate because, it's close.
Yeah,
It's close. And I will never forget being in the presidential library, and they've got all the newspapers and everything from the Depression in there. And the headlines in those newspapers were all the ones that I was seeing currently. So I very well understand the climate that you came into. So you get here, you've got Ben. Ben seems to be doing pretty well.
Yeah.
How do you start making your way, literally coming here outside of Ben, probably not really knowing anyone, putting the success that you did have behind you and into a full-on recession?
It was extremely challenging, I have to say. But as someone like that, looking back at it over a period of time now, it seems less so. But the one thing I will say that I found that I think is probably interesting is that it really challenged me on so many levels. Like, I don't think I had realized how difficult it can be. I mean, I think in Australia, we're kind of cushioned from a lot of things, where it's a long way away from anywhere. And I just don't think I was aware on any level. So, I do think it was really interesting from a complete learning experience and, personal growth, because it was like, I thought I was pretty good. I thought that, and then I was like, what? Nobody wants to talk to me at all. And, it took a long time of, knocking on doors and, trying to do just anything to sort of get even the slightest foothold in to do something. And, and for a long time, it wasn't even anything I was particularly interested in doing, but it was like, at least I can do this. I can meet people. I can make money and, slowly sort of figure out where I should be, because unless I've actually done something, you never will be able to get to that point, so I felt like doing something was better than doing nothing. And so that's kind of where I was for quite a few years. And then, I was lucky enough to sort of find a place that felt a bit more like home, which was kind of a weird one, because it's also at the ABC here. And so I've worked in ABC at Australia and ABC here, but it was not doing their regular sort of like news programs or anything like that. I mean, I found that it suited me to be sort of part of the Disney organization, I guess, and to try and start to tell those stories about how, creative people work within that massive infrastructure.
So thinking back, because I'm going through your list of accomplishments in my head, and that does not mean that I will get anything in the correct order. That just means that They're floating around in there.
Doesn't matter. The correct order doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's the path. So walk me through, when did you join those? So basically, how we met and when we met. One of the things that we talked about was the documentary that you did on video games.
Yes.
And I will never forget, this is one of those things that, this is one of the reasons why I'm so thrilled to be speaking with you, and so thrilled to be speaking with you for Upstate Women in Film and Television, because when they talk about systemic things with women and girls, I said to you at the time, I'm not really a big video person, but growing up I played Centipede. And you said, oh yeah, they designed that for girls. And I was like, what? So to me, you saying that, there are things in life that just open up your eyes. And I think that when people don't understand why all of a sudden people are looking to see her be her, to see it be it, to all these things, it's because it really is systemic that things are geared for certain sexes. So would you mind talking a little bit about, just from your documentary on gaming, how things even with gaming are geared towards one sex or another?
Totally. I mean, that was incredibly fascinating. And so we went back to the start of video games, which was it was the late 60s. So that's when we started into the 70s, mostly around, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and talking to those people like Nolan Bushnell, who started Atari, and from the very beginning, I mean, it was weird because I was making it with a whole lot of men as well. Like I was like the only girl, not the only one. There's one other, but
I'm sorry. Let me just ask you this: one other girl, and how big was your crew? How big were everybody that you were speaking with? Can you give me numbers with 2 women out of how many?
Yeah, I mean, when we were shooting, it was small crews. It was like maybe 10 at the most. So it wasn't big, but the director, I was producing, the director was male, the DP, we had a couple, there were 2, they were all males. The rest of the crew were male. And I would travel to San Francisco, and we also shot in Seattle, which is where Nintendo is based out of, and always the only girl. But it was also, and we were trying really hard to find women's voices as well from this time, and they exist. It wasn't like there weren't women who were a part of Atari or any of those other companies. They certainly existed, but because most of those early gamers were sort of engineers, it just lent itself that there was more dudes, I guess, at the time. And it was certainly, a pretty macho environment from what I can tell. But as time went on, I think they would have liked more women engineers. I think it was part of that culture there. But it was also the 70s, so it kind of, what they were up to probably seems not so PC now, from what I can tell.
No, of course. Of course. No, absolutely. I feel like I don't know, maybe a month ago I was flipping through the channels, and I don't know whether or not you ever saw this movie, but growing up in the 80s, there were a plethora of movies that just could not be made today. I was watching this movie, I'm just going to tell you, it was Porky's. And I was just like, oh my God, wait, how old was I when I watched this? But there's no way that movie would be made today. So I think that there's a fine line between, yes, they probably would have liked more female engineers. I think that that obviously of course they would want to know a woman's input, because to me the end result is they want your money, they want you playing those games. So if
Yeah.
you're a demographic and they can figure out a way to rope you in, they're going to do that. But the thing that blew my mind was you mentioning that the video games were specifically
Mhm.
designed for different
Yeah.
sexes. That was
And I think
mind blowing.
in Centipedes, I do believe, I think, and I could be wrong here, and if I am, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure that that was actually designed by a woman as well.
You
So I
see,
think that's kind of
I
part
fell
of,
right in.
yeah.
They saw me coming.
Yeah, so I think it was part that, you know, or maybe it was like, oh, well, women game designers can design games for women. I mean, I don't know that they literally thought this, but it could have been as much as that. I mean, it seemed to me that a lot of the women were more in the supporting roles, like,
Mhm.
which is always traditionally the case.
Mhm.
Historically anyway, you know, there was a lot of women in marketing and in those, you know, kind of positions, which are all very important positions. But most of the women we spoke to were definitely more about supporting the men creators and, you know, figuring out how to get the word out about these games, etc. So that was interesting.
So when you're doing these, because I know that so much of documentaries, you know, it's interesting to me because obviously you have to blend in with the surroundings. They need to be comfortable and basically forget that you're there because you want something that's honest to portray. But I would think that even though you're supposed to blend in, you still can't help but have your own thoughts on the projects that you're working
Yes.
on and with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a marriage, isn't it? It's like, you know, you're ostensibly there just to capture what's going on, but that, I mean, just by being there, we're changing what's going on anyway at the best of times. And, you know, that's something that was interesting, and I know you probably want to talk about this later, but the second Frozen documentary series I did, which was for Disney Plus, which was, you know, 6 episodes filmed over a year at the animation studio. We shot for 110 days. So we kind of did become part of the furniture. They literally would forget that we were there. So that was a bit of a difference because, you know, if you're only going to go into a place for a couple of days and shoot and figure it out, then you're much more noticeable than, you know, we'd have our cart and we'd wheel it around with the cameras and everything on it. And everyone's just like, oh, whatever, there they are, you know, where are you going today? And but even still, like where your perspective really starts to come in and that sort of marriage of what's there is when you get into the editing room. Because
Absolutely.
we had months and months of footage on that show, and it was like, well, what story are we going to tell? And how do we tell it, and what do we want to say about this? And, you know, it's interesting that you talk about women, and one of the stories we did want to talk about with that is, you know, obviously Frozen as a movie is a story about women, but behind the scenes it's also the brainchild of a woman who is also now a studio executive. And you know, as a behind the scenes, that's kind of part of that story, which is so fascinating. And as a leader, what I find really interesting about Jennifer Lee is that she leads with vulnerability, you know what I mean? She knows exactly what she wants.
No, that comes across.
Yeah, but she's not scared of that. Whereas if that was a man, I think it would be very different, you know. I think they would find it harder to be so honest, and I mean, vulnerable is really the word that comes to mind, because she really was. That process made her extremely vulnerable. And, you know, I've spoken to her since then, and, you know, she often says that even the thought of that gives her PTSD, you know, the series itself, because, you know, it was a really difficult time for her to and the pressure was immense, but she wasn't scared of being honest about that at the time.
Well, so then let's jump in to this, because to me, Um, that documentary was just there's so much to discuss. And one of the things that I was so thrilled that you included was she was on the phone, I believe, trying to figure out, was it school pickup or, and it's interesting because I can tell you that I am very blessed. My girls, I've got two daughters and they're much, much, much older now. But
Yeah.
there was a time that literally, I can't tell you how many directors and producers, God bless them, came with me while location scouting to school pickup until we could either, meet another mom to,
Yeah.
rendezvous, or I, on one location scout, I had my youngest with me,
Mhm.
and we went to a school, and they had roller blades because it was a vacant school and they were using it for storage. And everyone except for the director put on roller blades and started rollerblading down the stairs through this vacant school. They taught my daughter how to rollerblade. It was like this great thing. But nonetheless, I really digress.
No, but I think it's important, right? Like as a mother, I mean, it's just part of like what we are. And, there has to be that kind of like children come in and out. And I mean, at the animation studio, it was really interesting because there were always kids there, like animators, kids or whatever, it was often that situation because they're working long hours and what are you going to do? And even, if it wasn't so much about childcare, it was like, the kids have to come and visit us and see us that we're still alive sometimes because we're here all the time, or
Well, I'm glad that you showed that, because I was speaking with a woman who is in a, a high ranked position. And I tried to ask her what I thought was like a human question, woman, to woman, to try and talk about, changing the narrative with things. And the woman was clear cut with her personal life was her personal life. Her business life was her business life. And that and so, so I very quickly had to change gears because there was no point in even though, my final comment to her on that subject was, if we don't talk about it, how do we change the narrative? And then I moved on. But it really stuck in my craw. And so you including that is us talking about this and making this part of the narrative is huge. And, so that being said, how did you manage with your family? Because I can only imagine the amount of time that you were not home for this. So how did you manage?
Yeah, I traveled a lot. I was in LA a lot, and it was not easy for my kids or my husband, bless
Yeah.
him. But we felt like it was important to do, and so we kind of made it work as we could.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I remember I looked at my at the end of the year, I got my Delta Sky Miles account thing, and it went, you've traveled 89,000 miles or whatever it was to one location. And I was like, oh, that's really sad. I've just been going to the same place.
Yeah.
And it was entirely true. And it's really interesting now because our last shoot for that series happened March 13, was it March 14, 2020. So it was like I was supposed to go to LA for what would be my final trip. We had, dinner and all sorts of things planned with the crew. And then the world shut down. We managed to do the shoot remotely just by, pure luck, just finding a room. And luckily Jennifer Lee said she'd come in, and, we had crew that hadn't been anywhere, and everyone, because we didn't know how, at that point, how to stay safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, we were lucky, and we were lucky that nobody got sick and nothing happened. But it was really the final day of that shoot for that series was kind of like the start of the world changing.
Yeah. Well, there were so many things about the documentary that just fascinated me on so many levels. And their anxiety with the project became you did an amazing job because it became my anxiety as
Yes.
well. One of the things that really fascinated me was that Disney has a release date and just backs into it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, first of all, was mind-blowing to me, that it's not like, okay, this seems like it's going to be doable, let's say that it'll be this date. The fact that they just choose the release date and back into it,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that it really came across to me that with all the different people who were working on it and working in the same thing, doing the same part, knowing that it could be cut, it made it seem like everything was precious and not precious at the same time. It
Yeah.
was precious because you realize what you're working on, but it can't be precious because if it doesn't work, you're moving on.
Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting process, and it takes a lot of people. Like there's like 400 people or something that work on an animated movie at that end point. And it's like this massive ship, right? It just is like, this is it, we're making it. Because every year, although not last year because the pandemic did put, like, so Raya and the Last Dragon actually just released in March, but
Right.
that would normally have been their November release, and it would just go into that. So they have that every year, and they have films coming up because they take about 4 years to make each animated movie, and they're looking so far ahead, and it's also planned. And every minute of an animator's day is kind of accounted for because it equals X amount of animation ultimately per week. They have to do, like, if an animator's working for like a month, they could animate maybe, I think it's like 30, like it's tiny amounts. Like it just takes so much time. And, they only, at the end of the 4-year period, an animator working full time on that movie may only have a minute to show of that film to say, oh, that was my scene.
That's incredible. And talk about a rough cut. All of the times that they would say that they're showing a rough cut, it's just like, oh, wait, how do you know what's happening? Because
I know,
it was so crude.
Yes, so
Well,
crude.
it was so crude because granted, we're a Disney family, not gonna lie, go to the parks. We drank the Kool-Aid. We love Disney. So I'm very well aware with their movies, their animation, as you and I spoke and Sunny before this, I don't know a lot of grown-up movies, if you will, because for so many years, my life was what my kids wanted to watch. So, that's it. But to look at what goes into it, to really appreciate the voiceover aspect, because I'm thinking that they're doing the voiceovers while they're watching complete animation.
No.
And it's not that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. It really gave me a totally different appreciation for voiceover work in conjunction with animation.
Yeah. And, it's a lot of work for them. They come back multiple times, and, because things change, because unlike, making a movie, you start with a script, there is a script, but then it just changes all the time. Even in that final year, and they'd been working on it for 3 years or 2 years or whatever it was before I started following them. The first cut that we saw is nothing like the movie that was finished. And we're like, what?
Yeah.
Because they draw it roughly and then they just throw it out and they say, oh, let's not do that, let's do this, let's get this one. They can, the freedom that they have is, pretty
Right.
remarkable.
So I'm getting aware of the time. I would like for us to talk for about 5 more minutes,
Sure.
and then maybe we'll open it up to some audience questions.
Sure.
So I want to wrap on our discussion of the Frozen documentary, move on to what you're working on now and how that process is in this day and age. So I took very few notes of what I want to ask because I would much rather be in the moment and speak with you extemporaneously. But so to wrap this up with Frozen.
Mhm.
So obviously show yourself.
Yes.
Huge theme throughout. And I know that you've spoken, extensively about this. So my question is actually more mother to mother,
Mhm.
mother of girls to mother of boys.
Mhm.
When they say you are the one you've been waiting for, I can tell you that as a mother of girls, that's a mantra that you want to get in there. How do
Yeah.
you feel about that with boys? Is there a difference? Is it the same thing?
I think it's different. I mean, maybe other people will disagree with me, but I think it's different because I think from a lens, when you're looking at being a mother of boys, what I'm trying to do as my boys grow up is make them more aware of diversity and gender inequality, and just so that it doesn't, they're not they don't grow up to be the power mongers, right? They're part, they're equal, all of those things that should be the case. But even without saying, I think when I was growing up it wasn't the case. It's like, I remember my parents were always like, well, you're going to get married and then you'll give up work and then you'll have babies, and I was like, no, I'm not.
Yeah, I'm out of here.
Yeah, so I'm out of here. And I did it much later in life after I'd done many other things, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's, so I feel like rather than, Frozen is a great empowerment for young girls to know that they can do whatever they want to do. Whereas for my boys, I think it's like an awareness, like, I mean, that it's not just you guys that can do anything, it's these girls as well. And, you should be, aware of that. And of course they are, because they don't get any of that yet because they're little, but they're getting bigger. They're not that little anymore. Mid-sized, but
mid-sized. They're like a sedan. I don't know, maybe a Mini Cooper. We'll talk.
So I feel like the relationship is different, but it's also encouraging because I'm like, yeah, even though this is a movie ostensibly that girls will like, I think it's important for boys to embrace it as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's all that we can want, is to open a conversation. And sometimes all it takes is one line in something that can spark that conversation, no matter whether it's, no matter whom you're with. Sometimes that's all it takes to open a conversation and change a dialogue, basically. So thank you for answering that. So what are you working on right now, and how are you doing that in this crazy world?
So, so I work at I work at a place called Lincoln Square Productions, which is part of ABC in New York. But, as we've discussed, I tend to make documentaries about other creative process, but none of that's happening anymore. So I literally saw the world, I had ideas, there were things that I wanted to do. I wanted to, talk about maybe doing something with Disney Theatrical again, which I'd done in the past. I really wanted to follow Disney on Ice as they did their next show. Like I just thought all of that stuff would be super fun, but of course none of it came to be.
Yeah.
And so I ended up being put on assigned to other shows. So I did a lot of COVID related news reporting. I did a documentary that I was one of many people about, I think it was called American Catastrophe, How Did We Get Here, which is about the failures to see what the writing on the wall. So it was like a ticking clock, basically, all the missteps that America went through to get to where we are now. And then more recently in December, I did one that was about the vaccine, and we were lucky because we were given an air date that happened to be the first day that the vaccine started shipping out. So
now, did it just happen, or is Disney really powerful?
No,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
No one knew. It was like one of those things. We knew it would be around that time. We didn't know that it was, going to be that very day, which was a blessing and also a curse, because we wanted to capture all of that and put it in the show. So we were shooting stuff, we were editing day of it, like it was, and also remotely. So no one's in the building. We're all working from home. So that was a challenge. And now at the moment, I've just finished doing a documentary about a con artist, which is an episode of a series that ABC does called The Con. And it airs on Wednesday night. And today we recorded our narration track with Whoopi Goldberg. That was exciting. That was fun. But it's so weird because when you would normally be in a studio, you would go, we usually shoot when Whoopi finishes on The View and go there, and she will go into a voiceover booth and we would be there and we would, talk, and she'd do her thing. I was just on the phone, on the phone, and, and I have editors that are also working from their homes, and we were shooting, people, we were able to shoot at people's homes, but everything was shot outside. So we're not shooting indoors anymore. Which has its issues. Especially shooting throughout winter here. So it's like a brand new world, and we're learning all the time, and we have strictly enforced COVID protocols, and which also evolve all the time as well, and very
absolutely. Well, and hopefully we are going to go back to some new kind of normal. The more we know, the better we can do. So Megan, I want to be able to open up the floor. So I'm not going to thank you, although thank you. Sunny, did you want to moderate any questions?
Sure. Hi guys. So let's just have, we can just, I guess we could just open it up and say, if you guys would like to ask a question, you can unmute, or you can type it in the chat if you'd like to ask Megan a question, or just say hi.
All right. Hi, Diana.
I had a question.
Diana.
Hi,
Diana.
Hi, Jillian, Sunny. Megan, I had a question for you. It was a fascinating story. Thank you so much for coming to share with us, and really filling us in on all this. But I was an editor a long time ago, so you said you had so much footage on the Frozen 2 doc.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, what was your process to come up with the story? And also, how long did the edit take with all that footage?
It took longer than we wanted it to. It took, when did we start? But it was very short as well. That's not the right answer. But so there were 6 episodes, so they were not quite an hour each. And I had been shooting since December, and we didn't start editing until August. So we held off, we had moments that we would edit and bits and pieces. I was trying to wait until certain things happened so we would know what the story was. And it wasn't just me. I had a very big team of story producers, and we had a story room that was our own boardroom that had basically all sorts of cards all over it, like that would be moments that
Yeah.
people would find, and everything was transcribed, and we'd all go in there and we'd say, okay, this happened and then this happened, and we'd kind of join the dots. And we did that for months before we got into the edit, basically, because we were all completely overwhelmed. But in terms of story producers, there was like 6 of us, I think, working pretty consistently, trying to really figure out what those gems were to make sure that none of those moments slipped through the cracks, because it was too vast. It was like
Yeah.
a ridiculous amount of footage. And because it was a verite series, we would never turn the cameras off because you just didn't know when something was going to happen. So,
Yeah. I mean, a 6-part series. Wow. I mean, and there's so much material. I mean, it's really compelling. So thank you very much. I couldn't imagine what the edit was like. So thanks for that explanation and how you even got to the story.
yeah, it was it was a challenge, but I think we always knew that the heart of the story had to be Jennifer Lee and like her struggles. And then we also knew that there were personal stories that we wanted to include. And when we kind of knew that there was those tent poles, things would come and go basically around those big moments.
That part with Chris Buck
Mm-hmm.
was just it's heartbreaking. And when he shares the fact that after the original opening that people would be congratulations and I'm sorry. I mean, my heart broke. We lost within the last year, we lost a family member who's basically my age. And it's crushing. And so to be in a situation where you should be celebrating one of the biggest successes of your life and have people say to you that and bring you in the moment and then very quickly bring you out of the moment again with reality, my heart broke. It was a very brave thing for his family to allow that. And I understand that Ryder became part of the movie, but it was very brave to open up their hearts to speak about that.
Yeah, and it was, that was unexpected as well. I knew about Ryder, but I was not going to speak about Ryder unless Chris wanted to, basically. But then he did. He really chose that this was the time to talk about it, and he hadn't really done that before. But again, I thought it was important because these people put so much of their own personal stories on the screen as well, which is why you get such an emotional response from watching it. That, knowing that is really, important as well.
Absolutely. And I think also, I mean, one of the reasons why I think it's so important in changing a narrative, male, female, they, whatever, I think that there are so many people in the world that go through such similar stories that the more people are honest, the more hope other people have, because they're not alone. They don't need to know the person. They just can see, oh, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, because essentially we're all people, right? Jennifer Lee juggling parenthood and, Chris dealing with the loss of his son. They are just humans, and it's all what we all do. We all have our own personal losses or challenges. So I felt like that was really integral to the story, because it's kind of what the story of the movie is as well.
Right.
So it feeds into each other.
Beautifully, but beautifully, really, in your hands, just beautifully. Sunny, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Any other?
I had one more follow-up question, Megan. So was that the most, I've done a couple of documentaries, and it's always something that is really surprising that you never thought would happen. And so what was that thing that you never thought would happen and that ended up you shooting it and getting in the movie or in the series?
Sure. I think there was a moment that they actually, I mean, I didn't think it was going to happen. And there's a moment when they believe that they're going to cut Show Yourself from the movie. And I mean, they did tell us not to shoot it, but they didn't, but we kept shooting it and they didn't tell us to stop. So we, and, you know, it was a pretty intense conversation for them, and they're not going to be rude to each other, but there was like, it was a creative disagreement. And I was actually in New York on that day with the Lopez's. We were shooting with them in their home studio, and the camera guys in LA were texting us saying they want to cut Show Yourself, and I'm like, and I'm like, are they going to get angry? Are they going to hit me? Are they going to, what's going to happen? And the Lopez's didn't know. They had no idea that this was coming, but it was a moment. And then I thought, you know, they'll probably not let us include it because it's a partnership. And, you know, so there was, but they were always, everyone was always completely honest and okay. And I don't think there was nothing that we were asked not to include, which was also surprising.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yep. Good job. Good job, Megan.
Anybody else have any questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, so we've wrapped this up actually in pretty much an hour. Megan, thank you so much. Your graciousness in speaking with me, your graciousness with Upwift in general, it's not taken lightly.
Well, thank you. It was so fun to be here, and I hope people enjoyed it.
Oh, I think everyone enjoyed it. And as I said, we're going to be sharing it on our YouTube page and elsewhere. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in person.
That would be nice.
Yeah, we'll
Yay,
grab
Megan.
coffee.
And
Thank
actually,
you so much.
yeah, we are going to be having our next event, which if
Please.
Megan, you are absolutely invited if you would like to come, but we're having a live and in person Oscars party April 25th. So come to the Oscars with us. Yep.
Fantastic. That sounds super fun.
Old Savannah in Kingston, New York. So hopefully we'll see you guys there. Sorry.
All right.
Sorry,
Fingers
Jessica.
crossed. Sunny, thank you. Megan, thank you. And thank you everyone who
Yeah,
came
thank
tonight.
you.
We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank
Good
you
night,
so
everybody.
much.
Be
Thanks.
well.
Good night.
Bye.